the captain called down to the deck. We were kind of in the middle of operations still. We were like in the thick of it and said, send Molly to the bridge immediately. And I was like, it's kind of bad timing. Yeah. We're kind of in the middle of this. Anyway, I go running up there. And as I get to the bridge, I look out and the side of the glacier is still calving off in this area. And what that looks like is this 60-meter tall piece of ice breaking off from the front of the glacier. And what we see is 60 meters because that's what's above the surface, but it's also 300 meters below as well. For certain, depends on how it breaks off, but it could be, if it's the whole front that breaks off, which happens, that's a really big piece of ice.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Backcountry Manifesto podcast, brought to you by Sharedport. I'm your buddy out west, Hayden Samak, and today on the show, I'm talking to Molly Curran. Molly is a research engineer in the Deep Submergence Laboratory at the Department of Applied Ocean Physics and Engineering at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. From now on, I'm calling them WHOI, so that's what I mean when I say that. You're probably aware of at least a few things that WHOI has achieved, like helping find the Titanic, for example. Molly designs, assembles, and operates deep-sea robotic vehicles that explore all sorts of crazy deep ocean stuff for WHOI, ranging from hydrothermal vents and volcanoes to Arctic sea ice, and she participates in all sorts of expeditions that take her all over the world. And she just happens to be one of my very best friends. So today we're talking about exploration, we're talking about her recent trip to Greenland, we're talking about all sorts of really, really cool science. You're gonna love this. I love Molly, you will too. So without further ado, Molly Curran. Molly, thank you for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
One of my favorite parts about our friendship is getting to flex that I know you. In different capacities, we talk to a lot of scientists that do a lot of really, really cool, really, really technical things. And I love describing your gig, but I feel like sometimes I describe it poorly. You had to help me sit down and write that intro just then.
I mean, it is a mouthful though.
Yeah. Well, that's why we use the teleprompter for it. What you describe your gig to me?
Okay. So like you said, I'm a research engineer. I went to school for mechanical engineering with a minor in ocean engineering.
That was at UNH?
At UNH, yeah.
I visited you a couple times up there.
Pause up.
Yeah.
Love UNH. And my job it's different every single day, which is really why I love it. Some days we're just at a whiteboard coming up with crazy ideas. Other days I'm just at the computer doing computer-aided design, so modeling. And that ranges from coming up with designs that will then go into fabrication, technical drawings for those, or finite element analysis. So looking at when is something going to break? When is something going to implode? And kind of everything in between. And then some days I'm out on the water on small boats.
And then some months.
I'm out on ships for, weeks or months at a time. And
operating those vehicles.
Yep. So everything from coming up with the idea of the robots, working with scientists to come up with a plan to achieve their science. And then actually going into the field and operating the vehicles with the scientists there to get what we need to get.
So they're basically, you're kind of like a scientific camera operator, and they're trying to get you to be like, oh, we want to look at these things, we want to see these features. And is it do you have a scientist sitting over your shoulder being like, go that way, or
Sometimes we do. And that's important, right? Because we are the engineers. We don't know all of the detailed science. So we do need, oftentimes, we'll be on the seafloor and we'll think we're just looking at a plain old rock. And a scientist will be like,
losing their
my
mind.
God, that's like, we've been looking for that for years, So it's really, it takes a team to do it. It takes a really big team between the engineers and the robot, to the scientists and the equipment that they bring, to the ship's crew. I mean, we couldn't do it without the crew of the ship just keeping us fed, keeping the ship running, keeping us safe. So when we go out on these expeditions, it's really, there's a lot of important people involved to keep it all running, from the folks in the engine room to, the captain and everyone in between.
Right. So it's like, if we're making like an extended metaphor of a movie set, right? Would it be fair to say like I guess there are like head scientists that come out with you that are like spearheading these projects?
Yeah, we call them the chief scientists.
Okay, these chief scientists are like the directors. The auxiliary scientists might be the screenwriters and the actors, and they're kind of applying and interpreting like the job. And you're way more on a technical thing.
Yes.
You're like the camera operator who's like running the crazy equipment, troubleshooting it when it breaks.
Yep.
Which you've told me sometimes it does.
It does always.
All the time.
The ocean is a bit unforgiving.
Well, and also like the nature of your missions being that these vehicles are not, they're not manned, so you can take a lot more risk with them. And we'll talk about that later, right? Because that's like kind of like a big deal. It's really a technical job. Mm-hmm. And it's super, super high level technical job. So much so that so much so that you end up having astronauts come out of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
Yeah.
Relatively frequently. I don't know if this podcast is gonna come out before or after the one that you're smiling about. But we can tease it, or we can tell you to go back and watch it. Whichever one, like, you'll be able to figure it out on the timeline, dear listener, dear viewer. We're gonna talk to one of Molly's former colleagues, astronaut Laurel O'Hara, who came back from space this past May. That's gonna be cool as shit.
That's gonna be cool.
So what drew you, like, why do you want to do the oceanographic engineering? Because we both grew up in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania's a landlocked state. Yeah. I mean, you worked at that marina for a long time, but that's about as close as you got to to the ocean, really.
So I'd say, I definitely didn't grow up on the ocean, but I grew up on water. So I worked at the marina for years, and
you also competitively raised jet skis.
Yeah. So growing up, as you know, my family raced stand-up jet skis, and my dad, being an engineer, was our mechanic, and I got to see like the cool shit that he did, making our jet skis, using engineering towards something really cool, like making our jet skis faster. And so I think
Gino's a madman.
I know, he's the best.
I love that guy.
And so he's actually out at the Jet Ski World Finals right now.
Yeah.
So, kind of combining engineering and these vehicles, the jet skis and water. I had some pretty gnarly races growing up and really crazy waves and weather, and saw how intense the ocean was.
Yeah.
And it scared me a little bit. And then went to school for engineering, and my school offered a minor in ocean engineering, and I was like, I love the water, and I love engineering, and combining those two to do cool shit and kind of take engineering to not just, I knew that I never wanted to just sit in an office, to kind of taking it to that next level of excitement and working in this really harsh, unpredictable environment, So that's kind of how I went down that road.
No, that's cool. And you were lucky enough to get a job with Woods Hole, like right out of school.
Yeah.
Was that like super intimidating?
Yeah, for sure. Showing up my first day and seeing all the cool robots and everything, the institution has chemists, biologists, geologists, all the science you can think of, and also these brilliant engineers and physicists. And it's seeing these vehicles, we have massive vehicles that have dozens of subsystems, and seeing it all work together is really impressive. And being a part of that is super exciting and was intimidating until you really break it down into these subsystems. And it's like, I know how to do that. I know how to work on this. I know how to fix that. Mm-hmm. And then
I'm listening to you. I'm just going to pour this at the same time.
Next thing you know,
okay.
I can't say no. You're operating these big systems out in the ocean.
I guess.
Thanks.
This is an E.H. Taylor foolproof. It's super awesome and super good.
Oh, yeah.
That's sort of an abstract overview of like what you love about your job, mm-hmm. right? Like on like a philosophical, I guess, sort of level.
Yeah.
I would imagine that probably your like favorite, like kind of like immediate component of your job would be the cruises that you get to take and the places that you get to visit. Could you rattle off like a handful of places that you've been?
Yeah. So we've deployed vehicles, or I've been on expeditions to Chile, Costa Rica, Alaska, Greece, Norway, up in the Arctic, Greenland. On all up and down the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, kind of all over the place.
Just crazy harsh environments too. Not all of them, but some of them for sure.
Yeah. Whether it's hydrothermal vents or super, we're working really deep, or we're working under Arctic sea ice, mm-hmm. or up against glacial terminus. Yeah. It's always different. But the one thing it usually has in common is that it's a really harsh environment.
Right.
And the environments are completely different. From the Arctic to open water, you have completely different challenges that you're dealing with. So it's you can never really predict what you're going to get when you go out there, which is, I think, why I like it so much.
It's kind of like double challenging too, because you guys are not in any sort of like you're not risk adverse.
Yeah.
And that's one of the advantages of using these robots.
Exactly. Yeah. So we build these robots to go places that people can't go, mm-hmm. or that we don't want to send people. Because if we lose a robot, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, if we lose people, that is a really big deal. So we often, depending on the mission and depending on the vehicle, there's might be a really high possibility that we lose the vehicle. But that's the risk that we're willing to take to get this super unique or high value science. So it's really high risk, high reward type of stuff that we're often doing.
Okay, so it's obviously high risk, but mm-hmm. it's not a high risk human life. It's a high risk time and money.
Exactly.
What does one of these submersibles, like ballpark,
cost? It's actually really hard to say because almost all the vehicles that I work on are
boon counter.
See, boon.
I don't know if that counts as a stop. We'll see. We'll leave that up to our engineer Andrew, engineer producer Andrew.
So it's hard to say because it's not like we're producing multiple of these vehicles, and a ton of research and development goes into them, and a ton of design.
They're kind of built up over time, right?
Yeah, and so the cost of just replicating one of them is very different than the initial build and development, because that is, most of the cost is in the engineering and the design. So that's hard to say. Probably multi-millions of dollars.
Yeah. Like $20 million or like $3 million?
Yeah, it depends on the project. I'd say on average, maybe between 3 and 6 or 7 million.
Yeah.
For these.
I like how you kind of got like a little quiet. You're like, on average, like you didn't want anybody here, but like we're saying it into a microphone. It doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It just depends on the vehicle, but millions of dollars. Yeah.
How often do you lose one?
Well, we really try not to.
Okay. Well. I can see how this is not a line of questioning that somebody might want to go down.
I'm gonna take a sip of this before I answer.
We'll talk about something else.
No. I actually have something here. So this looks like a piece of trash.
It does look like a piece of trash. It feels like a piece of trash.
Yeah. So what it is a piece of plastic.
It is.
That's broken and chipped, as you can see. But that is actually a piece of Nereus that imploded at 33,000 feet almost below the seafloor in the Kermadec Trench off the Pacific. And the whole vehicle imploded. Oftentimes when there's an implosion, it causes a chain reaction and it's catastrophic, which it was in this case as well. But
yeah, it doesn't look like this ended super well for that robot.
That was a super high risk, high reward vehicle. But the plastic pieces are buoyant, so they actually floated to the surface. So we got a little piece of Nereus back. And I think it's a really good reminder of how harsh the environment is, and there's so many factors that go into it. And we test everything. We have a pressure test facility on site, and every component gets pressure tested. And but it's just a high risk operation that we're doing, and
sometimes
we know that going in. Hopefully not too often, but it does happen. Especially, we're trying to get to these really harsh environments. And at the institution, we do have a human operated vehicle, Alvin, and that is less high risk, high reward, and everything is based around safety, and the safety factors that we use for that are much, 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 much higher than what we use for an unmanned vehicle. So I think it's just cool to see a good reminder that it's a gnarly environment down there.
Well, yeah, I mean, like that's like the kind of the interesting thing about this is really cool. Gosh, man. I mean, you like the way that what was this, like a window gasket or something?
No, so it was actually a piece of the frame that held. So back then, the Nereus imploded in 2014. And back then, we didn't have syntactic foam, which is what we use for buoyancy now. And it had hundreds of ceramic spheres as buoyancy.
Okay.
And
really?
the spheres are about baseball size. And so this curvature here was
housed one of those spheres.
Like held the spheres in place. Huh. Now we have syntactic foam, which is much safer. It has these microspheres that you almost can't even see. They're so small. So you wouldn't have if one of these spheres exploded, it would likely cause a chain reaction to the other hundreds of spheres.
Oh, really?
Which is potentially what happened. But now we use syntactic foam, and so you wouldn't have if it failed, you wouldn't have a chain reaction like that.
Gotcha.
But some of these vehicles we deploy knowing that we might not get them back. Like an expedition I was just recently on, was super high risk, and going into it. I know, scary.
No, Boone's too scary. I want to ask you, I guess we could probably take the audio from those cameras for like this kind of thing. I want to ask you, what? Well, I mean, okay, so
I bet you that there are a certain percentage of our listeners out there that have heard submersible implosion, and they've heard us talking about the Titanic, and they've talked about high risk, high reward, and manned craft versus unmanned craft. The Titan thing.
Yeah.
I mean, can I ask you about that? Like, because I don't know, like, what's like cool to say or not. Is like, the deal.
that was a really, it's really sad for the whole community, the whole world in general, and our community in particular, because it hits close to home, and our institution is sending people down on a regular basis in Alvin, our submarine. And I don't want to get too much into the details of it, but I work mostly on autonomous and remotely operated vehicles, and that's one of the main reasons why we're using autonomous and remotely operated vehicles, is because we're going to these really harsh environments that we don't want to put people at risk in. Mm-hmm. And our submarine Alvin, they are held to the highest standards from the Navy, and so. Being an engineer and knowing the engineering behind it, it's like I said, held to the highest standards. But I guess my job is a little bit different in that people's lives aren't at risk, so we can take more risks, knowing that if something goes wrong, it's really which sometimes you have to do in order to achieve really successful missions.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy doing. Takes a little bit of the pressure off, I suppose.
For sure. Like in a very literal sense. Because it's funny, when you see these videos, these deep water submersibles, they just kind of look like they're like cruising, and it's really easy to forget that those structures have such a ridiculous amount of pressure that could, I wish like people could feel this thing, because this is like, I mean, ridiculously hard plastic. Even like even where there are apparent fractures, I'm squeezing that about as hard as I can. And like, I'm not getting it to budge. Like this is like durable stuff.
So like in the deep ocean, the deepest part of the ocean, where we have vehicles that go down there, it's 16,000 PSI. Yeah. So it's like putting 4 full-size elephants on the area of your big toe, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the whole vehicle experiences that pressure. And you see, we do all the calculations on the pressure housings and all of that sort of thing. But you start to see that much pressure has an effect on every single system down there. Even on things that you wouldn't predict that it would have an effect on. So it's really hard. The deep ocean is just hard to design for, and it's also really, really cold and really, really dark.
Yeah. What are some of like the things that you might like? How do you account for that pressure? Like, what are like some of the principles of design or whatever that you might use in order to make sure that something under 16,000 PSI doesn't just...
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the fundamentals of engineering. So everything starts with back of the envelope calculations and then goes into design models and finite element analysis. And aside from that, a lot of it is just experience and knowing, like when the oil is under a certain pressure at a certain temperature. We've tested that in our pressure test facility, knowing how it affects this certain type of motor. And there's so many systems that have to interact that it can be, it's more than just the calculations and the math behind it. It's
You actually
having
have to test it.
Yeah, we have to test it and just having experience. We have people at the institution that have been doing this for 40 plus years, and the knowledge that they hold that you couldn't find in a textbook anywhere is just so important to what we do.
Well, I mean, and it's just kind of by nature of being on the like absolute cutting edge of something like this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can do like the math and you can do the calculations.
Yeah.
But you're running into problems that nobody else has ever run into ever. So so you're learning new stuff about how materials react in these extreme environments all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And even, the environments, you can predict what they're going to be like, but sometimes you can't get that perfect. And we've run into situations where, we knew it would be harsh in a certain aspect, but we didn't know to what extent. And then we got down there and we're like, holy shit, this is wild.
Yeah, like you get down there or something and, some silt kicks up that you kind of weren't expecting. And now all of a sudden this silt is like kind of in these like mechanisms or just like things like that where, I mean, first off, like that's pretty fucking obvious. I'm sure that you guys account for silt, but like, but what are some things that you've run into before that you were like, didn't see that coming?
Yeah, I guess on that front, we were just working up in the Arctic and Western Greenland, and we were working up against these glacial fronts, and there's these big plumes coming out from the glaciers, and they're making these currents of up to 2 meters per second. So this water is coming out really fast, and it's bringing with it
the plumes of glacial runoff.
Yeah, but it's inside of the glacier. So it's subsea. They're called tidewater glaciers, and it's when the glacier meets the ocean.
Right. So on that like precipice where like the glacier meets the ocean, when you say subsea, I don't understand, like subsurface, like you wouldn't see the current, but like
subsea,
under
like
there.
In the ocean, in the water.
Oh, okay, cool.
Subsurface.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the glacier that we were working on had 60 meters of glacier above the surface of the water. And then 300 meters of glacier below the surface of the water. And so above the surface of the water, we can study that pretty good. We can send drones, we can get satellite images on a very regular basis. It's not easy, but it's not particularly hard to get that information. Whereas below the surface, we don't know what's going on without actually going down there. And it's such a dangerous environment. You can't send people down there. You can't send divers. You have to send robots. But it's really hard to get the robots and the ships up into those harsh environments in general, into the fjords. Yeah. The fjords can just get totally blocked off and choked up with icebergs. And when I mean icebergs,
fjord is like a bay kind of, right?
Yeah. Fjord is like, I don't know the actual definition, but to me, it's the ocean in between massive mountains. Okay. And these fjords lead up to the glacial fronts, which is the Greenland ice cap.
This is perfect. So what maybe we ought to do is we'll continue this conversation, but let's continue it in the context of how'd you get there? Let's talk about the cruises, because that's like one of the most interesting parts of your job is these months-long expeditions. And it was funny, when you first started doing them, I remember you and I would talk every couple weeks when you would like get service, like somehow, like you'd either be at like a station or whatever. And that was all the correspondence you had. Now with like Starlink and things like that, you're like way more able to be in touch, which is funny. But
it's pretty cool how the communication has changed. Just so, I've been at the institution for 9 years now. And when we first went out to sea, the first time we went to the Arctic, there was actually no communication with the ship. We were up there for weeks and weeks, and we had a satellite phone. You could make the ship, you could go up to the bridge and make a satellite call. if necessary, but it was super expensive.
Yeah.
And
It wasn't like go see how your cat's doing back home. Like
no. So, and then there was one single email for the whole ship. You could only send like a few, like small text, and everyone else on the ship could see what you sent. So,
oh yeah, you would be like texting your boyfriend or your husband something weird.
Yeah, that was frowned upon.
Yeah,
or provided some entertainment for the rest of the ship. It depends how you want to look at it, but. And now with Starlink, it's a different game. Its communication still can be tough, but now at least we have some form of communication. But when we would go out on expeditions before Starlink was really a thing, we would, once you leave the dock, you're out of cell phone service, you're out of any sort of Wi-Fi or anything like that, and it's just you and the ship and the people on the ocean.
I remember in one of your early cruises passing on a couple messages to your mom.
Yeah.
Because like okay, so you're all alone on these things. Describe these, and if you're listening or watching, I promise we're going to get back to this submersible approaching this subsurface glacier. But describe the kind of ship that you're on one of these icebreaker cruises, because you do a whole bunch of really interesting stuff. Like you've done, I guess, expeditions where you were operating a robot as it went down to like a volcano. Albeit not one filled with lava. You don't have a lava cruising robot. At least I don't think you do you?
No, not yet.
That'd be cool. We'll get to this, but take us from start to you're on the open ocean.
Yeah.
What is the process of one of these expeditions?
Yeah.
From conceptualization and identifying the science that you guys hope to execute and to casting off.
Yeah. So there's a few ways to go about it. We have existing robots. And so sometimes scientists will want to utilize a robot that already exists and add their own sensors typically. So it depends what we're doing. If we need to have a bunch of cameras on board, if we need to have a bunch of biological sensors, or we need to take push cores, do we need a manipulator arm, a robotic arm to pick up samples? So we'll really identify the best tool for the job, whether that's an existing robot or maybe a modified new robot or a fully new robot. And so we work with the scientists to determine what that solution might be and the best way that we can provide a way to get their science. From there, it goes into a lot of planning. Everything, we typically are working in the waters of a lot of different countries. And so working with the countries to get the permitting, working with the ships. Ships have to typically be
reserved. What are your favorite countries to deal with? I'm just kidding.
Ships typically have to be reserved like years in advance. So working with the ship and the crew, making sure that all of our equipment integrates onto the ship. For example, like we're in the U.S., all of our stuff has U.S. Power connections. And if we're going onto a Norwegian ship, we need to make sure that we can actually get the right power from them and it's not going to blow up all of our stuff. So a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, a lot of prepping.
How much does one of these, anytime like there's like big signs like this, with a lot of technical equipment and a lot of logistics and a lot of big vehicles moving around for very long periods of time, extensive crews, what does an expedition like this cost?
Yeah.
And how do they go, Kevin wants to know what kind of worms live by these hydrothermal vents. That's worth $40 million. Let's do it.
Yeah. Depends on the amount of people, the size of the ship, but it can range anywhere from $20,000 to $80,000 a day.
Jeez.
I'd say on average.
And some of these cruises,
sometimes a little bit more, maybe.
So, colloquially, like you call them cruises.
Yeah, we call them cruises. It's really an expedition.
Yeah.
It's probably the farthest thing you can get from like a luxury
pleasure cruise.
Yeah, pleasure cruise. Yeah, it's very, very different.
Okay, so how long? Like some of these cruises, they can be in the orders of months,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like you and I ballparked it before, but like,
Yeah.
how many days is the average cruise?
Yeah, I'd say anywhere from four to 7 or 8 weeks.
4 to 7 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, depends where you're going and how often you're limited by how much fuel and food the ships can take on.
Yeah.
And so different size ships have different limits to how long they can stay out. And when you're breaking through ice, sometimes you're stuck in one place for a while and the ship is just going back and forth and not able to get to where you want to go. So, using a lot of fuel, but not really getting anywhere.
Yeah, so you could be out there for what is 3 weeks, 74 days? Is that what it is?
3 weeks.
Or no, I'm sorry, not 3 weeks. 8 weeks, 74 days.
Oh,
7 times 4.
56.
Oh, I thought I was like smart as shit just then. I was like, watch this. I'm going to do this math in my head. I'm going to impress everybody. 56 days at $80,000 a day. These things are pricey.
Yeah, they're pricey.
How do they decide what's worth that investment?
Yeah.
Because it's not private entities being like, again, hi, I'm Kevin. I'm really interested in the worms by the hydrothermal vents.
Yeah.
And here is my many millions of dollars to find the answer to that question.
Well, sometimes funding does come in
from
that
private,
way. Yeah.
like philanthropists, like type folks who are like,
Yep. And trustees and folks that are just passionate about the ocean.
I have a yacht. Now I'm curious about giant squid.
Yeah. Give us all your money, please.
Yeah. Yeah. If you are a rich trustee,
please sponsor us.
please sponsor Molly's projects.
Yeah. No, but we get a lot of our funding from the National Science Foundation and NOAA and kind of everything in between. The Keck Foundation, different foundations, National Geographic. It's super variable. And
pretty much the places you'd expect.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you have identified the science, you have secured the funding via these various routes. Now it's time to actually prepare for the cruise. Like you said, you do have kind of a stable of robots. So some people might be like, hey, we want to know X, and we think that robot Y is the one that'll get us to this area. We want to add certain sensors or sample collectors or just what have you. What's that like? Do you like, is it like an a la carte thing where they go, okay, like.
Kind of.
How's it work?
I
want to add a sample collector to the front of something to grab some soil or sediment by the hydrothermal vent.
Yeah.
What happens?
We all have the same goal, right? Of achieving high level ocean science. And so we will do whatever we can within means to make that happen. Taking into consideration the risk of, there's handoffs, right? So we might say, in order to do that, you want to put this sampler in a hydrothermal vent that's going to be super hot. We might say, well, we can't put the manipulator arm that far into the hydrothermal vent because it might not, it might burn off some of the hosing or whatnot. But we would say, well,
what if they say, but I really wanna?
Yeah, well, then we would say, okay, well, let's develop this this handle so that we can attach your sensor to the end of the handle so that the arm doesn't have to go in the hydrothermal vent, but we can still get your sensor in there. So, right? So we are looking at the big picture of we need to be clever about the decisions we make, but we'll really do a lot in order to get whatever that science is done.
Because that's kind of the nature of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
In that, like, you recognize it's high risk, high reward. So when somebody says something that's like a little bit outside of the box, you're like, well, I guess you've come to the right place, but you still got to be strategic.
Yeah, most of what we do is outside of the box. And so we're really familiar with that. And that's what makes our job so fun. Is coming up with sometimes these crazy ideas in order to do cool stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so we have now established what science we're hoping to achieve. We have secured the funding.
Yep.
We have a sample collecting arm
Yeah.
attached to one of your robots. Would you leave that there, or would you just disassemble it afterwards? Or you're like, oh, cool, like Alvin got a spoiler, or like, are you?
It depends. Sometimes in trying to achieve a certain objective, you come up with really good ideas that you can implement not only for your own robot in the future, but potentially other robots at the institution as well. So it's constantly this evolving process, and we try to not reinvent the wheel too much. So if we can take something that we learn and share that with our own operators and even operators outside of our institution. So we work with a lot of other vehicle operators around the country and the world because it's a small community and we all kind of got to help each other out. So people will share ideas and share ways that they do things. It's pretty cool.
Okay, so you got your tricked out robot now.
Yep.
It is time to prep the expedition, because I assume that that's like the components are the science, the tool, and then now you're assembling your dream team.
Yeah.
Your crew.
Exactly.
How many folks are on the average crew?
Yep.
What are the average roles?
Yep.
And I guess, like, how do they go about assembling those people? Because if you're on a boat for 3 months, right, you kind of got to make sure that folks get along a little bit anyway.
Yeah. So there's really 3 different teams that all have to come together. There's the engineering team. So we have to look at how we're going to operate, fix, and deploy our robot. And so we typically we'll have an expedition leader, so kind of like a leader of our team. Then we'll have mechanical, electrical, and software folks. So we kind of cover all of our bases. So having a good range of mechanical, electrical, software, and then from varied experience. So you don't want to be out there with people that have never gone to sea before. But you also want to continue to grow the knowledge base and bring out more, younger folks, new
if you
engineers,
don't invest in like those kind of
students.
folks,
Yeah, you want to invest in these people that will be going to sea for years to come. So kind of a combination of that. And then there's the science team. And oftentimes, you have the chief scientists and the principal investigators. These are the scientists that have been doing this likely for many years and have been waiting for many years to achieve the science. And then we often have a lot of students out there that need this science for their PhD or, are working with these more experienced scientists to learn and come up with new solutions to certain things. And then you've got the crew, and the crew you can really think of as, running the community. You've got the captain who is in charge of everything and everyone. Anything the captain says goes. He's really the top head of all the operations. And it's also his responsibility to keep us all safe.
That's pretty much Andrew here, man. He
Yeah.
What he says goes, and his responsibility is to keep my foot out of my mouth.
And then you've got, the mates that help run the ship and navigate the ship and are kind of the right-hand man to the captain. And then you've got, remember, we're living out here, so you need cooks to, keep us all fed and alive, which arguably is, I'd say, the most important people on the ship.
Right. They're kind of like, in a roundabout way, the arbiter of everybody's mood.
Oh my gosh. Because when we're out there, we'll be working 12, 16. Sometimes if something is going wrong, you won't sleep and you'll be up for 24 hours straight just working. Or something's
going super right.
Just working on these vehicles, and really the thing you look forward to is eating. Taking a break for 20 minutes and sitting down and having a really good meal. So that actually goes a long way, is having good food on a ship.
And about how many folks did you say were on these cruises?
Anywhere, it depends. I've been on ones with 35 people to 100 people.
How and the food's normally pretty good?
The food is normally pretty good.
Because that would be like, I can be in a lot of places for like extended amounts of time. But if like the food situation gets messed up, it is very difficult for me to like stay in the game.
It makes a huge difference when the food is good. And
what's one of your favorite ship meals?
When the coffee is good.
The coffee's good?
That's absolutely critical.
Yeah. What's like a good ship meal?
I mean, I don't want to brag here, but sometimes we get like some good steaks.
Oh yeah?
Actually, the ship that we were on a few years ago, the Polar Stern, they were just down in, they go from the Arctic to the Antarctic, summer to winter. And along their journeys, they had picked up some really good meats.
Really?
And we were eating like ostrich and some really fun meats that they had gotten. And they would have barbecue days, and we'd be able to cook up some of the good meats.
Yeah. I ate walrus once, and then not too long ago, I was up in Alaska with some indigenous folks, and we had seal ribs.
Wow.
I did not care for the seal ribs.
Yeah.
I did not care for the walrus either.
Yeah.
Because it was weird. It had like it was weird to me as somebody who doesn't interact with it. I'm sure it's like normal to somebody else, but like, you know how like walruses have their cheeks with like little whiskers?
Yeah.
Like you could see, like, because they kept the skin on it. I guess like that's something that they like. And it was like about a square inch chunk of mostly like skin, blubber, and like a little bit of meat. And the skin had like the little hairs on it still. Like it was like very obviously walrus. Like if somebody gave you that chunk of skin and was like, what was this from? You're like, I don't know, walrus.
Yeah.
Like, so interesting meats above the Arctic. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. We've also seen some working in Svalbard and Greenland.
Oh, like the lutefisk and like the sharks.
Lots of shark, lots of whale.
Yeah. Yeah. Whale's fine. I don't know if I just had a bad experience with it, but I ate, I forget what kind of whale it was. And like, before you guys at me on like Twitter and like Instaslam, this is not something that I like seek out. Like I did not obtain it illegally. Like it was a legal fine meal shared with some really wonderful people. I had like fermented whale, and my palate was just not accustomed to that. I was like surprised.
Yeah, it's unique.
Yeah,
it's really oily. It's kind of like a mix between like seafood and red meat.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the fat of most animals doesn't have any vasculature in it. Mm-hmm. So the fat of whales, I believe, is like fully vascularized, which is, I think that's right. I don't know. We're going to have to fact check that. And if it turns out that it's right, leave it in. If it turns out that it's wrong, take it out. So the food is super important.
Food is super important. Coffee is super important.
You've had steaks and
sometimes we stuff. Eat quite well.
Although it would suck to be a picky eater in that example of the ostrich. Because it's like, all right, well, they had a bunch of ostrich, but...
Yeah.
Okay, so we've now assembled our crew.
Mm-hmm.
We've identified the important stuff.
Yeah.
Selecting the ship.
Yeah.
I guess that happens kind of in tandem with the robot and related to what kind of science. So
figuring out where we need to go, what type of ship we need, because ships are all built really different. And that includes the infrastructure on the ship, like the overboarding equipment, what sort of cranes, A-frames do we have that can actually get our equipment off the ship safe and successfully? Does it need to be ice rated? How long can it stay out? How many people can it bring? These are all factors that go into it. And the location of the ship, right? So is it going to have to travel across the world to get to where we need to go? Because that's not so efficient. So oftentimes, when we're working in the Arctic, we use ships from the Arctic. And oftentimes when you're working, same goes for the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean.
So earlier you'd said like sometimes like things change with ships, and obviously you're picking ships from certain spots in the name of like efficiency. Are you ever like stoked when you get on a certain ship? Like, are you like, oh, dude, we got a French ship? Hell yeah, dude, the food's gonna be bomber.
For sure, yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh my God, the Wisconsin ship, it's gonna be hot dish for.
Yeah, so
and we're gonna be the Great Lakes, I guess.
You wouldn't expect this because sailors typically drink a lot, but we actually, alcohol is prohibited on most of the vessels. But there are a few that still allow some drinks. And, sometimes it's just nice when you have worked a 16-hour day and you want a beer before you go to bed. Yeah. So there's a German vessel that had a little bar on board. And so that was quite nice. But yeah, in general, we sailing on a lot of these ships, we get to know the crew, and I'd say the biggest thing is having an experienced crew that knows what they're doing, works well with the scientists and the engineers. We're out there working together all day, every day, and you can't just go home and hang out with your family or your friends after. So it's really important that we work really well together. So having a good crew, I think, is one of the really vital parts of a good ship.
Yeah. Okay. So it's home is where the heart is. The crew makes the ship. The ship is nothing without the crew.
Exactly.
Okay. We're going to take a little break right now.
Love it.
And when we get back, we're going to talk about the day that we're leaving port.
Okay.
We're going to talk about cruising, and then we're going to talk about what happens on the cruises that you tend to participate in. Kind of like the big cruises most often, those being the ice-breaking cruises in the Antarctic. Okay. Hang out. We'll be right back. Hopefully there's some sponsors giving you messages, because that means we're getting paid. And we'll be right back with our pal, Molly Curran.
Woohoo.
Want to see me get uncomfortably caffeinated?
Go, 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 go. Let's go.
Yes. Let's do it.
Woo! I'm 32.
Wow. That was crazy.
I know. It was pretty cool. I'm known for being
I don't know if I've ever seen anything cooler.
I'm known for being a pretty cool customer, man.
All right. Welcome back. Hopefully there was an ad there. As promised, now we're going to kind of go through we're departing.
Yes.
It is the day that we cast off and go on the expedition. So what do you call that? Launch day?
Yeah. So
probably not launch day. Shove off the dock day.
Yeah, all the above. Right. Leaving port.
Okay, leaving port.
And it's usually an exciting day, knowing the expedition is about to begin. And as I had mentioned before, you don't really know, what you want to do, but you don't necessarily know exactly how you're going to do it because of the environment and the weather and the equipment. And so for me, it's always a really exciting day thinking of like, there's so much potential. There's potential for things to go really good. There's potential for things to go really bad. There's there's everything in between, right?
It's like a nervous anticipation,
exactly.
like excited. Yeah.
You know, how is this going to go? Is the vehicle going to break? Is the ship going to break?
Do you typically know most of the people that you're on, like the?
I know my team really well.
Okay.
We work together, you know, leading up to the cruise, and typically on all sorts of different projects.
Yeah.
And I know my team is wonderful.
Yeah.
They, you know, I can trust them, and
You're excited to spend time with them.
excited to spend time with them, and they're really brilliant engineers. And that's important, to be able to trust your team. And then, you know, sometimes the scientists, we've only met on phone and Zoom, and then the crew, oftentimes you don't meet them until you come aboard, unless you've sailed on the ship before. So it's a lot of new people, and you walk onto the gangway, and sometimes you don't even, you've never been on the ship before, so you don't know how to navigate it, and they can be a little tricky to navigate sometimes, just the layout of them. So it's really exciting, you know, learning the people, learning the equipment, learning the rules of the ship. Every ship is different, has different, you know, protocol for everything from abandoned ship to what do you do when the coffee's gone, you know, because you never leave coffee. You never leave the coffee pot empty. That's just the number one rule. So, you know, just learning all of those little ins and outs of the ship and the crew, and it's really exciting. And then, you know, getting underway, like I said, the anticipation of what's going to happen, and you know, are we going to have a really exciting launch and recovery because the weather's going to be bad, or you know, is the vehicle going to get stuck on the seafloor? You know, there's a lot to go through your head. Or are we going to make a new discovery, find a new rock or a new animal that's never been found before? There's just so much potential that it's a really exciting day.
So you cast off, you do what I imagine is probably, I would imagine the initial travel is like pretty uneventful. You know, you're just kind of cruising open ocean.
Yeah.
Like we said, you do a bunch of ice breaking cruises.
Yeah.
Describe that type of vessel. Describe like an icebreaker ship.
Yeah, so they have reinforced hulls so that they can actually smash into the ice and break it in order to get to where we need to go.
But how big is the ship?
Anywhere from like 250 to 400 feet long. So they're pretty big. And the vessel that we were on in the Arctic sea ice, which was going through, there's kind of two different types of ice that you could be working with in the Arctic. There's Arctic sea ice, and then there's glacial work, which is the ice that breaks off of the glaciers. And they're completely different environments, both in the Arctic, both really hard environments to work in, both a little bit unpredictable and challenging, but really quite different. So for the Arctic sea ice, we need bigger ships that can actually break through multi-year Arctic sea ice, or else you simply can't get up to the poles. For the glacial work, we had a little bit of a smaller ship, but it's more of dodging the icebergs.
Right.
So it's not just ice everywhere. Typically in the winter it is, but where we were going, it wasn't ice everywhere. It was massive, massive glaciers that we had to work around.
So whereas the big icebreakers, it's more like a maul going through like a log or something. Whereas, you know, the smaller icebreakers, they have the reinforced hull because there's the expectation that they're going to encounter some ice at some point.
Exactly.
But it's more like driving and avoiding potholes. It's like, your tires should be able to take in, so should your suspension, but you don't want to be hitting every one of them.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Cool. I think that's a good way to think about it.
What are some of like the logistical challenges of like navigating that kind of environment?
Well, the thing is, it's really hard to get up there. It takes days to get just to the ice. If we're working in the Arctic sea ice, it takes days just to get to the edge of the ice.
Yeah.
And then once you get into the ice, it's super unpredictable. So we go by satellite images, but they're not. You don't get them very often. It's maybe 1 or 2 a day that we can work with, and that.
Dude, I wish my Onyx updated like that. That'd be fucking tight.
It doesn't give you all the information about the ice. It kind of just gives you a coverage amount, but that ice could actually be multi-year ice and be super, super thick. So the icebreaker could get up there and, we might only need to go a few miles and it could take days because the ice is so thick and it creates, it's always moving right with the tides. And so it creates these pressure ridges of ice that can be super thick and the ship just can't get through them. And so, if we're trying to get to one point, we can't just go straight there. We might have to, try to come in from every little angle to try and break through the ice to get there. So getting places is really, really hard.
In these ice-breaking ships.
In these ice-breaking ships. Just getting the ship simply there can take days, or can sometimes it just simply can't get to where you want to go because the ice is too thick.
So in addition to like the traveling safety, there are, of course, like the obvious safety issues that you would expect on a boat, right? Like things like fires. There are some kind of unexpected ones. One of which you were telling me about is
polar bears.
Yeah. That's wild. Because
and
you run into them fairly frequently?
Yeah. So when we're working up in the Arctic sea ice, kind of near the North Pole, we run into them quite often.
Yeah.
And they're incredible creatures.
Yeah.
And depending on what we're doing, certain expeditions, we actually need to get off the ship and onto the ice, which is a cool thing in itself. You're standing on Arctic sea ice with 4,000 meters of water below you. But when we are on the ice, the biggest threat is the polar bears.
So how do they prepare you for that?
Yeah. So there's actually extensive training that people go through for polar bear training, because I think they're a bit unlike other bears in that they will just hunt out humans any chance they get, really, in this particular environment. And so we need to take every precaution when we're on the ice. They're pretty sneaky, and the Arctic sea ice, it's not just totally flat.
So it's not you can see them coming from like forever
not
away.
Like you could see them coming from forever away. The ice is white. The polar bears are white. And the ice actually forms these big ridges.
Yeah. And
it's perfect mounds for the polar bears to hide behind. And the ridges are all over, and they're sporadic, and so it's would be really difficult to spot them. And they also, if there's any open water, they'll swim in that as well. So, like within the ice. So, whenever we do go out on the ice, there's a lot of dedicated jobs just for watching for polar bears. From the highest point in the ship, the bridge, we'll have half a dozen or even a dozen people that their only job is polar bear watch. And their job is to just have their eyes out at all times with binoculars and looking for the bears, if anyone's on the ice. And then for the people that are physically on the ice, they're probably going to have their head down in the science, right? So they are surrounded by a group of people that their only job is, again, polar bear watch, but these ones are equipped with guns and flares to take action if a polar bear were to attack. So it's exciting. It's really, being on the ice with these creatures is really cool. They're beautiful, beautiful creatures, and we don't ever want to hurt them. Mm-hmm. We just want to keep ourselves safe. So hopefully they would be spotted from far away from the folks on the bridge, and then we would just get everyone on board as fast as possible.
Have you ever had to do that? Have you ever had to get on the boat because they were like, there's a polar bear a couple miles away and it's coming this way?
There's no way to really know that, right? So the only thing you can do is look out visually.
No, that's what I mean.
So yeah. So we've never, at least on my expeditions, haven't seen them while we were on the ice. But if conditions start to get foggy, then we would say
it's kind of spooky.
It's kind of spooky. It can get really sketchy. We can say, we can't see beyond this point. So everyone, we gotta halt operations because we just can't see what's coming.
Do you know anybody who's ever gotten into it with a bear or like had a close call or anything like that?
I don't, thankfully. I'm not sure what that outcome would be, but we take enough precautions that I think hopefully it never comes to that, at least while we're on the ship. But we work out of, sometimes getting up to the Arctic, we'll work out of Svalbard. Mm-hmm. And there's a ton of polar bears on Svalbard. And, sometimes at night you'll hear the helicopters going because they use the helicopters to scare them out of the town.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you'll just be laying in your bed and hear the helicopters going at like 2 a.m. close to town. And, but yeah, so we've seen them from the ship, and they're not afraid of the ship. The ship probably has a lot of good smells coming from it, but they'll come like pretty close to the ship and kind of have their noses up, checking us out. And we'll see a lot of polar bear tracks out on the Arctic sea ice when we're just cruising along through the ice. You look down and you'll see the polar bear track cruising along. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And while you or the folks that have not had confrontations with these bears.
Yeah.
If you guys want to hear what happens when you do have a confrontation with a bear, you should check out our episode with Rudy Norlander, who recounts his grizzly bear run-in of September of 2023. That's a crazy story.
Yeah.
I think I sent you that one.
Yeah.
Hey, producer Andrew here. We had to shuffle our release schedule a bit, so our episode with Rudy Norlander will be available next week. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, so we've covered everything, the potential dangers, the travel, the logistics, all the stuff. You have done 4 of these icebreaker cruises?
3 to the Arctic, yeah.
3 to the Arctic.
Yeah.
Tell me about tell us about that. Tell us what these cruises are like. What are some of the things that you've hoped to accomplish during them, I guess.
Yeah.
And I know that one of the more challenging but regularly occurring aspects of your job is when something breaks.
Yeah.
I would love to know how you deal with that. So describe the cruise. Now you've gotten to where you want to be. It's time to do the science. What's that like?
Yeah. So I'll use this recent expedition as an example. And we were working up against the glacial front, like I said, in the fjords, up against the edge of a glacier. And you want to try to prepare for everything you're going to encounter ahead of time. And we knew that there would be these high currents and fresh water is much more buoyant than salt water. And so these freshwater plumes come out of the glaciers and go to the surface. But the vehicle, being in freshwater or saltwater, changes its buoyancy drastically. So in saltwater, where we might float, if we're in freshwater, we would sink. So that's a huge danger for the vehicle, is these freshwater plumes coming out of the glacier. Additionally, the sediment that's coming out. And for one of our missions, we actually went down to the seafloor and we were taking a sample, and we were right in the plume. So the sediment is coming out of the glacier and it's falling to the seafloor. And we were sitting on the seafloor, and the sediment collected so quickly on our robot that we went to take off. We were 60 pounds heavier than 15 minutes earlier. And that's kind of the difference between...
How big are these robots?
Yeah, ours, the one that we work with in the Arctic is about 5,000 pounds. It's about the size of a minivan.
And it's so engineered, and the tolerances are such that like gaining 60 pounds on like, which is like what, 1% roughly of its weight. If it was 6,000 pounds, it'd be 1%, right?
So
that's very concerning.
It is, there's different types of vehicles. Remotely operated, which have the standard remotely operated, which have a tether to the surface. So you could pull them back. And then there's autonomous vehicles. And this is a hybrid vehicle. So it's got a fiber tether that goes to the vehicle that allows communications so that we can have, we can use hydraulics and have HD camera views, 4K camera views directly from the ship. But we need that fiber tether in order to get from the ship to the glacial front, because the ship can't get close enough because it's too dangerous. And so the ship has to stand off something like 2 kilometers often because the glacial front is always calving. These glaciers, actually, at least the one that we were working with, expands 5 to 7 meters a day. And but that does not mean that it's growing. It's actually overall shrinking and melting. But they expand 5 to 7 meters a day into the ocean. And then those big chunks break off. And you can't really predict when they're going to break off. So the ships can't get anywhere close because it would be too dangerous. So we need this fiber tether in order to get the vehicle close to the terminus to do the work.
Okay.
I forget where I was going with that.
You were talking about how sometimes things break and the different types of machines. And I asked how significant was that 60 pound, that 1% weight gain?
Okay. So
we're leaving that in.
I just went off on an engineering tangent and
no, I liked it. It's good.
Yeah. So anyway, we have a fiber tether.
Yeah.
So it's only twice the thickness of a human hair. So we can't pull this 5,000 pound vehicle back on it. So we have to be somewhat close to buoyant. And if we find ourselves much heavier than we expected, we're essentially, we could wind up entombed on the seafloor, right? We couldn't ever make it back to the surface to get recovered by the ship if we're too heavy.
And so our listeners, like, as I know, like somebody's palms just started sweating. Again, this is not a manned vehicle.
Yeah.
This
just
is
a robot.
Yeah, the robot will be entombed, and Molly Trust is safe up on the boat.
Safe up on the ship.
Yeah.
And you know, just to reiterate, this is an expedition that was super high. You know, the value of the science is so high.
What was the goal of the thing? Like, what was the goal of the expedition?
Yeah. So this expedition in particular was looking at the glaciers. We know that the Greenland glacier is melting, right? The glaciers are melting at a really fast rate. If it all melted, if all the ice melted, sea level would rise by 7 meters, which is a lot. That would cause a lot of problems around the world.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And so we need to understand and
because I want to contextualize that, because you hear like 7 meters around the world, right?
Yeah.
Andrew, can you look up what like the flood surge was in this recent hurricane that we had? Because that caused obviously like all sorts of like damage everywhere from Florida to North Carolina.
Yeah.
You know, what does that look like? What was that flood surge?
So it looks like it reached 12 feet, so 3.6 meters above sea level.
Okay, so yeah, twice that, basically, all across the world, not in an isolated way.
Yeah. And then, you know, there's so many more implications of the warming of the ocean and what that does for the sea life and the atmosphere and the environment. You know, there's a lot of implications beyond just sea level rise, but the Greenland glaciers are melting really fast, and we can look at what's above the surface from satellites and drones and whatnot, but below the surface is really hard to get to because, like I said, the ships can't get close to them. You can't send divers down because they're really, really dangerous. They're always calving off. These big chunks of glaciers are calving off and creating icebergs. And so you have to get, really the only way to explore it is with remotely operated vehicles. But back to the science. So they're melting, and they're melting at different rates, different glaciers that look similar from the surface are melting at very different rates. Why is that? And from the surface and from satellites, there's really no, they're experiencing the same ocean temperatures, the same air temperatures. Why are they melting at different rates? So it must be something below the surface. And scientists believe that as these glaciers are melting, they create these plumes of water coming out of the glacier into the ocean. And these plumes carry a lot of sediment that's just basically entombed within the glacier.
Absorbs light and heats shit up?
Not necessarily. So the sediment comes out of these plumes into the ocean and then falls to the seafloor and creates these moraines. And a moraine is kind of like a hill. Creates these little hills in front of the glacier that almost act as stops for these mountains of sediment in front of the glacier have an effect on the water that's accessing the glacier, can act as like a stop for the glacier pushing out. It actually, the dynamics of the glacier depend on the sediment that is in front of it, and will have a big effect on the rate in which it's melting. And this is something we don't know much about. We know how much these different glaciers are melting, but to this point, we didn't know what the seafloor looked like in front of them. So now we were able to go down and actually we can create models of what this seafloor looks like. We've got, we use what's called multi-beam to map out where these moraines are and what the sediment looks like and how big is the sediment. Does different sediment size have an influence on how much the glacier is melting? Are certain glaciers putting out different sediment sizes, like rocks, essentially? This glacier is spitting out a ton of these bigger sediment pieces, small rocks that create this little mountain in front of it that actually have a big effect on how it's melting. But you can't get down there. It's really, it's deep, it's dark, it's really dangerous. So we have to send our robots down to map it, collect samples, get all of the sensor data, see what the flow of water and sediment is out of those glacial fronts. Take a look at like what the front of the glacier actually is. So there's we got down there and the chief scientist almost started crying because it was she'd never seen the full front of a glacier before underwater, and there were these massive caves that had these plumes coming out of them, and it was really rewarding to be able to provide, get our robot down there and allow her to access that place that had
she'd
for
known
years,
it theoretically,
but in the model. So that otherwise is totally inaccessible.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And one of the things that makes it so dangerous, because I don't think we touched on that. We've said that it's dangerous many times. You witnessed an event on this latest cruise.
Yeah.
Which was the thing that which is the whole reason that you were exploring this with robots, not with people, more or less.
Yeah.
What all happened?
Yeah, it was a beautiful sunny day, and we went to deploy the robot. And just as we got it over the side, the captain called down to the deck. We were kind of in the middle of operations still. We were like in the thick of it, and said, send Molly to the bridge immediately. And I was like, it's kind of bad timing.
Yeah.
We're kind of in the middle of this. Anyway, I go running up there. And as I get to the bridge, I look out and the side of the glacier is still calving off in this area. And what that looks like is this 60-meter tall piece of ice breaking off from the front of the glacier. And what we see is 60 meters because that's what's above the surface, but it's also 300 meters below as well. For certain, depends on how it breaks off, but it could be, if it's the whole front that breaks off, which happens, that's a really big piece of ice.
Thousands of tons.
Yeah. And we found out after the fact, after doing a drone survey, that it was actually 16 acres big, the piece of ice that broke off.
Maybe millions of tons.
And when it
do you know how much it weighed? Like about? Like, is there any way to estimate that? Like, that is such a huge piece of material that like I don't even know how you begin.
It's hard to even think about it. So like you can think about just the surface of it that is, 60 meters. That's like a massive apartment building, right? And that breaks off, and with that, there's so much surface area where it's now cracked off that it creates like an avalanche of snow and ice onto the water. And ice is buoyant, so it all comes onto the water and then flows out towards the ship. And so the ship has to then get out of it also creates a wave.
Yeah.
The wave for us wasn't particularly anything that would endanger the ship, but still exists. And what's more concerning is the ice that then flows off of the break towards the ship. And when I say avalanche, kind of like a mix between a flood and an avalanche, because it's snow and ice, but it's also kind of flooding into the fjord on the water surface, and it's chunks anywhere from the size of a car to a house, all breaking off and flowing. And oftentimes the big piece that will break off, the big iceberg, will flip. And now that it's not stabilized by the glacier, it'll flip. And
that must be crazy to see.
That is crazy to see because it brings all of the ice and the water with it. And it's really exciting.
And if you had your robot deployed, then that robot's gone.
It's hard to say. It probably wouldn't have been good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were going to be surveying pretty much right along where that piece broke off.
How long do you give it before you're like, okay, I think it's done? Like, do you...
Yeah.
Is it like a matter of hours? Is it like days that you want to make sure that it's stabilized? Or do you just go, well, that's kind of just the nature of this evolving environment. We know that it's like, melting and calving and...
That's exactly your last point there. It's the nature of the environment is that it's really unpredictable. And we had to wait for the ice to clear out of the fjord, like in the surrounding area next to the glacier, just so that the ship could get close enough again. Mm-hmm. But when it's going to break off again, probably in a different area, is pretty unpredictable. So you kind of just have to be ready for it and understand that we're putting our robot into this really dangerous area. And if the glacier calves when we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, then we might lose the bot.
How long did it take the ice to clear from the fjord?
Yeah. I believe we got in the water the following day.
Really? Oh, so it happens that quick?
It depends on, there's a lot of different factors that go into it. And the ice moves around kind of in weird ways, but the ice will also push from one side of the fjord to the other. Mm-hmm. So if one side is clear, then we can work on the other side and vice versa.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Those are the days, the big days, the science days, or, there's something crazy going on like that calving glacier, which I guess was also a science day. Doesn't matter. what about the down days? What about the days where there's like, is it just go, 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 go all the time? Or like when you're cruising out, is it just like, all right, well, there's not really much to do?
Yeah.
Or like just downtime.
Yeah.
You know, I assume that with an operation with that kind of overhead, it's always like, you know, do as much as you can.
Yeah, there's definitely not a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
And when we're not in the water, we are often working on or maintaining or fixing or turning over the vehicle.
Right.
So getting it ready for the next day.
Okay.
There definitely are scenarios working in Arctic sea ice where the ship has a really hard time getting to where it needs to go. So you might think that you'll be diving the following day, but the ship is stuck in the ice and you're not going to get there for 4 more days.
I had talked to you and I, this was after you got more consistent communication, I feel like.
Yeah.
I messaged you one time asking you how your trip was going, and you said, well, we're currently stuck. And then you sent me a video.
Yeah.
And do you have that video still?
I think I do. Yeah.
You do? Okay. Well, if we have that video, we'll put it up on the screen right now. And if not, you're going to have to take our word for
Picture it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were in really, really thick Arctic sea ice. And remember, this is a really big vessel, 400 feet plus long and really big, heavy. And we are completely stuck in the ice. And so typically what we'll do, you know, if we get a little bit stuck is the ship tries to go back and forth and back and forth. And then if it really gets stuck, it'll start to roll side to side, and it has tanks of water that it can use to pump from one side to the other to roll the ship a little bit. But we now had been stuck for 3 hours, 6 hours, going on quite a long time. And we can't move forward or aft. So they tell everyone that they need to stay inside. I'm like, oh, what's going on? I look out one of the windows and the big crane, which is a really big crane on the ship, picks up a bunch of train tires, you know, just basically steel, hundreds and hundreds of pounds, thousands of pounds of steel, picks it up and starts swinging it from side to side to try and roll the ship, to shake it loose from the ice. And that was quite the sight to see.
And it worked.
And it worked, yeah.
How long did it take?
A while.
Is that standard procedure? Is that like somebody like, well, I guess they have the train tires on deck, right? So
yep. So that's the thing about being in these tough environments is that you can only, and I think, you know, it's the same when you go out into the woods, right? You only have what's around you. And, you know, yeah, it would have been nice to have these other materials or something else. But when things go wrong, you only have
what you have.
And so you have to try to prepare the best you can, but you're not going to have everything. And so, you know, same goes for when the vehicle breaks. We use the materials that we have on board, and you only have a limited, you know, it's like backpacking. You only have a limited space, and weight and whatnot that you can bring. And so you have to use what you have, utilize it.
And that is an example though, where you would have a little bit of downtime because there's nothing else that you can do.
Exactly. Yeah. So in those instances, you know, the ship we're still living a normal life on the ship. Well, normal.
Right.
Not quite, but
some like life aquatic type.
And there's a gym. People will play board games and cards and go to the gym, and you know, when we're not working on the vehicle. So we try to keep it.
Just pass the time.
Yeah.
You've completed the science.
Mm-hmm.
You've done the expedition. You are now free from sea ice. and it's time to go home.
Mm-hmm.
What is the feeling like after 8 weeks, 12 weeks on a boat?
Yeah.
And finally coming back? I imagine it was different pre and post.
Yeah.
Easy communication.
Yeah.
What's that like? How do you feel in anticipation of it, and how do you feel once you've actually come back to society?
Yeah, it's they're totally different feelings, and oftentimes it's a feeling of accomplishment, you know, being proud of yourself and your team.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably gone through some hard times together, days where you didn't sleep. You know, you're put into some situations where, you know, everything isn't just smiles and laughter and butterflies.
Mm-hmm.
You're put into some really tough situations, and you get through that together. And so feeling, you know, proud of everyone, hopefully proud of the science that you've done, you know, furthering science and information about climate change or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, this sense of excitement, being able to go back and see your family and your friends and your dogs.
Mm-hmm.
But also a little bit of sadness, I think, in that you've been living and working with these people, and you become friends with them. And when you're out there long enough, it's like, that's life is eating and sleeping and working and playing cards with these people. And
You get bonded.
So you get bonded, and it's sad sometimes to leave them, because sometimes they're from all over the world. You're working with people from all different countries. And so, you know, you might not see them again, or at least for a while. So that can be a little bit sad and hard sometimes. But overall, I think typically it's a little relief in that hopefully you've accomplished what you went out to accomplish. And but you're probably excited to drink your first beer when you get on shore.
Yeah, unless you're on the German boat.
Unless you're on the German boat.
What is your favorite thing about a cruise?
Mm-hmm.
And like, don't give me like I'm really proud of the science. Like, don't give me that shit. What is your favorite, your dumb favorite, your superficial favorite thing about these cruises? And what is your superficial least favorite thing about these cruises?
So I guess I'll start off with the least favorite, because I kind of have an easy answer for that. So sometimes I joke that it's kind of like prison. You're in a big steel building or boat, except you don't get one phone call a day like you would in prison. No, you're it's not really like that. It's great.
Yeah.
But
you hear that was whole?
You're sleeping in a room with another person in a bunk bed.
Oh, that's a good. You know, that's something that we should definitely talk about. Describe like your living quarters on these boats. Give me like size, dimension, layout, and like
Yeah, so you're in a bunk bed, typically smaller, in like a twin size, like a mini twin. They're usually smaller than regular twin size mattresses.
Like what might be in a college dorm or something?
Yeah, except a little bit smaller.
Really?
Yeah. The rooms are really small. The cabins are small, like maybe half the size of this room.
Okay, and this room I happen to know is, I think it's 12 by 16.
Yeah, they're pretty small.
Wow.
They're pretty tight. And sometimes you don't even know the person that you're moving in to live with for 6 weeks. The bathrooms are usually pretty tiny. Bathrooms and the showers, and you often share them with like 4 people plus. The showers are like, if you've ever been in a camper shower, it's kind of similar to that. So that, you know, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but then you actually integrate into life, like a pretty simple life, pretty quick.
Oh yeah.
You integrate into the life and adapt to it really fast. But there's always challenges, you know?
What's your favorite thing?
And my favorite thing, I think, is...
Don't you dare say the camaraderie, dude.
No, I think it's getting a good cup of coffee and going out on the deck in the morning and looking out and knowing that we're in a place that like 99.9, probably higher than that, % of people on Earth will never see or access.
Mm-hmm.
And we're there for several weeks and looking out onto the beautiful ice and into the beautiful mountains is really a crazy feeling.
What do you feel informs your like proclivity for exploration? Like what why do you want to do these types of things?
Yeah. I think there's a few reasons. I like adventure.
Yeah.
And I like exploration.
Uh-huh.
And I think this is kind of mixes both of them together. I like the unknown. Like growing up, I always loved crazy snowstorms where we would like lose power because you weren't really sure what the outcome was going to be, and it was going to maybe be a little bit sketchy, and you'd have to be out of your comfort zone, and you'd have to do some things that you normally wouldn't do, you know, like to not
skin the dog for like the hide.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that. You know, I like the adventure. I like the unknown. I like being a little bit afraid and being in these situations where it's not just butterflies and everything's smooth. And my biggest worry is, you know, the traffic on the way to work. It's like, well, okay, this is, you know, we're in a pretty sketchy situation right now and we need to overcome it. And I love that challenge.
You like putting yourself up against legitimate consequence.
Yeah.
With like an objective.
Yeah.
Playing for keeps.
Yeah.
What, and you know, just because I don't know how this episode is getting like, you know, kind of like tossed around and shit and stitched together. I'm going to ask the same question of your former colleague, Laurel O'Hara.
Yeah.
Who is an astronaut.
Yes.
And find that episode. I think that's going to be in like our first drop of episodes, but you find that episode, our conversation with astronaut Laurel O'Hara. The question that I'm going to put to both of you is, in spending time in these extreme environments.
Yeah.
How does that inform your perspective on our local environment? That being like our day-to-day environments. And what does this like crazy perspective offer you? Like how does it inform how you feel?
Yeah.
About, you know, normal stuff?
Yeah. So I would say, you know, we get to go to these places that, like I said, most humans will never get to. So sharing the beauty of that and the experience, I think is pretty important, particularly with students and children, and encouraging them to be explorers and to work in these environments. But it really is just a different perspective. You know, you're from your day to day. Seeing these environments that are at risk and how beautiful they are and how delicate they are, and seeing being in your day-to-day back at home here, the actions that you take that are compromising that beautiful environment that we were researching. And so I try to not forget that when you get caught up in your day-to-day, and just remember those moments of how beautiful that environment was, and really how precious and delicate it is, and how we need to work to try to keep it around.
Molly, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out and telling us about your job and your philosophies on exploration, all sorts of good stuff. Why don't you tell the good folks listening and watching how they can find out more about maybe you and projects that you're excited about?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally.
Floor's yours.
We have a lot of really fun information.
This one right here.
Woo. So we have a lot of really good information. You can learn all about our robots, all about the science that we're doing, all about ways that you can get involved, or you could be part of the team at going to our website, WHOI.edu. Again, it's Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And there's a lot of ways that people can interact with us, and actually students. We love talking to students and doing outreach and getting kids excited about the ocean and exploration. I feel kind of strongly about that. So.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Check it out.
Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah.
Hey,
thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, you bet. If you guys want more of us talking to Molly, I'm sure we're going to figure out something to do for our Patreon subscribers. And
yeah.
Dude, thanks again for coming on. You're like one of my absolute best buddies. And, you know, I appreciate you coming all the way out to Bozeman and hanging out. It's been fun, though. We've been gold panning and fly fishing.
We have been. It's been a blast. I wish I could stay out here.
Oh, you can stay out here for as long as you want. We got a guest room.
Couch.
Yeah, oh, for sure. All right. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. And, yeah, thanks.
Thanks for having me. Woo.
Sweet.
Everybody, thanks for watching this episode of the Backcountry Manifesto podcast. If you want more Backcountry Manifesto, go ahead and check out one of these links right here. And make sure to share the podcast with your friends, comment, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. It really helps us out. Again, thank you very much for watching. Now go check out one of these things. I like this one. This one was a good episode, I promise.